Notes on pictures, spoiler-free commentary, and behind-the-scenes notes on movies you want to hear about. Looking at Stutz, a documentary written and directed by Jonah Hill. Jonah Hill is a movie star. He's talented. He has a body of work. He's branching out into writing and directing. He's in therapy. What if he makes a movie about going to his shrink and working through his problems? That should work, right? Well, maybe not. It's a tough concept to pull off without seeming like you're an attention-hungry narcissist who's tone-deaf, self-absorbed, and out of good ideas. That's a challenge Jonah decided to take on.
I was thinking about how in traditional therapy, you're paying this person and you save all of your problems for them, and they just listen. And your friends, who are idiots, give you advice. And you want your friends just to listen, and you want your therapist to give you advice.
A lot of his motivation was that Dr. Philip Stutz was his shrink, and he felt admiration, affection, and maybe even love for this guy. He derived a lot of good help from him, and he wanted to see if he could share the wealth. What could go wrong? I think one danger, and I'm sure Jonah recognized this, is that Jonah has to protect Jonah from himself, being the secondary subject of the piece as well as the writer-director. Is there any setting where an artist's judgment is more fallible than in his own therapy sessions? I think there was a high shooting ratio for this film, higher even than most nature documentaries where you're waiting for hours for the right bird to land on the right branch. Aren't you supposed to be natural and unguarded with your therapist? But don't you have a responsibility to make a good film for the audience and for the therapist who's being featured? I mean, you can't assume that you're interesting just for showing up and letting them see your shit. So there are dueling objectives inherent in a movie like this. Jonah pretty much had to figure this movie out as he went along, and it's about figuring out his life as he goes along, and for that he has the help of his shrink. Whose help does he have making the movie? I think he had more help than is initially apparent. It starts out looking very unassuming, very organic, very straightforward. Almost like you're going to therapy with a GoPro, so the mechanics of filmmaking don't get in the way, and the audience will understand the lack of production values because we're being honest here. We're trying not to demonstrate the observer effect, often confused with the Heisenberg principle. The observer effect states that you can't witness a phenomenon without changing it. Making this movie, you want either not to change the process or not to get caught changing it. But of course you're changing it. You're making a fucking movie that's important for Jonah's career. He's directed before, but the skateboarding movie in 2017 was a small-budget, small-risk movie. Jonah wasn't in it. If you didn't study the poster, you might not know Jonah made it. This one, Jonah is in every scene and about half the shots. If it bombs, Jonah goes down in flames. So how does Jonah safeguard this movie and try to protect himself? Not by playing it safe, by playing it crafty. What starts out looking like a home movie becomes more. I'm not telling you what, because I don't do spoilers. Let's say it gets creative. You can't help admiring Jonah's courage. And you can't help admiring Dr. Stutz. I can't help admiring Stutz and Jonah's restraint in some ways. Not once do they mention Stutz's book, The Tools, which looks like a useful resource if you're asking yourself the kind of questions Jonah is asking. Jonah doesn't idealize Stutz. He isn't painted as a flawless saint. We see he has Parkinson's, and we see his struggles to remain productive and to continue making a contribution to his patients. But we also see his dedication, his work ethic, his compassion, and his wisdom. I hope a lot of clinical psychologists and psychiatrists see this movie. Maybe some of the ones I spent time talking to. I got very little back from most of them, and some of them I don't even remember. Maybe they did their best. I choose to believe they did what they could, but I also believe I might have done better just reading Stutz's book. There's no way to know. That's the nature of therapy. If you're in therapy, the life you would have known without therapy is like the oars of a boat viewed at an angle through the water. There's refraction, there's perceived disconnect, because there's only one way to view those oars that makes any sense. Well, two ways, completely in the water or completely out of the water. And neither of those two ways is going to give you headway through the water. You can only guess where you'd end up on the road you didn't take. Jonah celebrates the guessing, and he celebrates what he thinks he knows, and he celebrates the difference between knowing and guessing. The defining sentiment of this piece is gratitude, and I like that. He's grateful for his life, for his confusion, for his shrink, and even for the chance to make his movie. And he celebrates illusion by throwing a little bit our way, and then confessing. I like Jonah's attitude as much as I like most of his screen choices in other movies. Psychotherapy isn't for everybody. John Wayne never went to therapy. I doubt that Harrison Ford ever went to therapy. Billy Bob Thornton? You can't tell with Billy Bob. He's a complicated individual full of contradictions. There are people, men and women both, who feel no real man would ever go to therapy. He'd eat quiche before he'd go to therapy. He'd even make quiche before therapy. We know from watching awards shows with interminable self-indulgent acceptance speeches that Hollywood celebrities tend to think everybody's like them and their friends. They're in a bubble, and they don't know it. Jonah is probably less like that than most actors of his stature because he grew up the fat kid. He was an outsider. I'm guessing by lunchtime at school, he didn't always still have his lunch money. So if there's going to be a movie about an actor working through issues with his shrink, the best chance you have of that movie being watchable is if it's made by Jonah Hill. You wouldn't want it to be made by Joaquin Phoenix, unless it's another hoax. And you damn sure wouldn't want it to be made by Ashley Judd. This one is made with judicious caution and yet creative courage, and it has some cool moments. Next, I'll give you assessments and value judgments on Notes on Pictures. Notes on Pictures, looking at Stutz, directed by Jonah Hill, about his therapy sessions with Dr. Philip Stutz in Los Angeles. One of the messages Jonah is delivering unmistakably is that the hazards of the world change us, inform us, injure us, and somehow present our best hope for rehabilitation from those injuries. We are all, in some measure, traveled and marred, trampled and scarred. It's an imperfect world, and psychotherapy is an imperfect answer. So, of course, this is an imperfect movie about two imperfect but engaging and interesting men, especially presented in Jonah's engaging and interesting way. Jonah finds fascinating connections between the question, how do I make my life work, and how do I make this fucking movie work? Somehow, that gets us rooting for him. It's almost like when you watch a stage play and you're engaging creatively with making actors on a stage a plausible and compelling substitute for something real. You participate in the illusion. In fact, you help drive it. This is real, or at least it looks real, but it still needs our indulgence to support some creative diversions Jonah includes to make it better than a static GoPro adventure in an office with two talking heads. There's a disarming quality to this movie that helps you trust Jonah and go along for the ride, because he's putting his balls on the table right next to a ball-peen hammer, hoping his balls don't get peened. Even if you don't trust Jonah, it's a ride worth taking. I give Stutz an 88, higher than average, but not a surefire hit with everybody, because movies with shrinks aren't for everybody. If you choose to watch this movie, maybe have a backup in mind in case you have a sudden irresistible urge to bail. Maybe Moneyball or Hail Caesar. They both have great performances from Jonah. Stutz is available for streaming on Netflix. Get your second opinion first wherever you get podcasts. Notes on Pictures, spoiler-free commentary, and behind-the-scenes notes on movies you want to hear about. Thanks for listening. I'm Monterey Jack.